Well, it is the largest integrated transport authority in the world. There are some 13 million passenger journeys every day. It's Transport for London. And right at the top of it is Transport Commissioner Mike Brown, who's relatively new in post. He took over towards the end of last year, and he's come in on a number of occasions to answer your questions and take your calls. And he joins me again. Commissioner, thank you. Good to see you. Good morning. Good morning, sir. Before we go to calls, can I just ask you something that's sort of broken within the last hour, 24 hours or so? It looks like more industrial action on the Underground, on the Piccadilly line. What's the management stance on this?
Well, I'm hoping we won't get to that point. We've got some talks organised at ACAS into next week, so I'm hopeful we'll be able to resolve issues. I'm obviously the best way to resolve these things, sit down and talk about some
What's
of the
at the heart of it?
Well, I think the trade unions have raised some concerns about some of the management activity around the line, some of the issues around the train condition. Actually, the trains are, of course, very safe. They're quite old trains, but actually they're quite reliable trains on the Piccadilly line. They were built in 1973.
Didn't the doors open at some point recently?
Well, we've checked all of that. We check any safety issues that are reported, and we're confident they're safe. I wouldn't put a train out on any part of the railway.
But did doors open?
Well, we did have an issue where there was an alleged to be a door opening. Now, that sometimes happens because there's a natural small spring back nick that is available in all of our doors. People will know that because if you get like the corner of your coat caught or whatever, obviously there has to be some leeway to pull the coat in. So, but we check any reported issue.
So the doors didn't open fully?
No. I mean, I think the point is that we have...
Well, the point is, respectfully, Commissioners, did doors open and were passengers' lives in jeopardy?
No, they weren't. Of course not. I mean, these trains are safe, and we would absolutely never put a train out that wasn't safe. And we'll have the talks next week. I hope we'll resolve it around the table. That's the best way we can do so.
And lastly, it's a bit of a nightmare because my understanding is the first potential day for strike action is in the lead up to the bank holiday. And of course, this is a line that a lot of people coming to the city or live in the city use for Heathrow Airport.
Well, not just Heathrow Airport, of course. The Piccadilly line serves King's Cross. It serves right through the heart of the West End. It's a very, very busy line, one of our busiest actually all day. So that's why it's important to get this resolved around the table. I hope we will at ACAS next week.
Thank you. Put your headphones on and get ready for your first call. It's Paul in Kentish Town. You're through to the Commissioner, Mike Brown. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Nick. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
I'd just like to say I'm not surprised that you're on this week, and it ain't Peter Blake after Nick destroyed him last week. But anyway, it's another matter. I'd just like to know when you're going to stop protecting Uber and start protecting Londoners.
Well, I'm very, very keen to protect Londoners, and that's why actually the best advice I can give Londoners is never ever get into any vehicle other than a taxi, a licensed black cab in London. Don't get into it unless you pre-booked it, however you have pre-booked it. That is the most important advice I can give people. There are stickers that the reputable private hire vehicles have on the back of their car that say pre-booked only. That's the most fundamentally important advice I would give people, Paul. There is a room for private hire vehicles in a city such as London, in all cities around the world, as well as the black cabs, the cabs you can hail on the street. I think there is a market for both. There is room for both. We've done this consultation. We've got this regulations review. I think we've got a measured response to this. Not everybody would agree with everything. I understand that. That's the nature of these sort of issues. They are controversial. But I really believe this is a chance to move forward to ensure black cabs are properly protected, that they have an important role in the future in London, which I really fundamentally believe they do. I use black cabs at my own expense, I should say, quite often. I occasionally use private hire vehicles for journeys perhaps in the around the outskirts of London. There is space for both, but the really fundamental important advice is no member of the public should ever put themselves at any potential risk whatsoever. Don't get in a car unless you've pre-booked it.
Paul?
Okay, Commissioner, I'm not surprised you use black cabs. Why wouldn't you? But what about you misleading the public about hire and reward insurance by the Uber company, and you're just absolutely hoodwinking us all. You're hoodwinking the public to let them think that they're insured, and they're largely not insured, Commissioner.
Well, what are you going to do? You're probably aware, or hopefully you've been made aware by some of your colleagues, Commissioner, that our political editor, Theo Usherwood, showed just how easy it is to become an illegal minicab driver. Figures suggest there could be up to 1 in 10 minicabs on London's roads could be driven illegally. Mr. Usherwood went up there with a different logbook, a different test certificate, not his own vehicle, and just walked out with one of those yellow stickers or whatever you call them. How can that happen?
Well, clearly I'm really concerned about that, and that's why in the regulation, because at the moment, actually, the problem is, Nick, at the moment we have this situation where the vehicle, the driver and the operator are licensed separately. The regulations review, the new way forward, will insist, in fact, that the operator gives us details of each driver that they have on their schedule, on their list. Now, that is a significant tightening up of where we are. Clearly, I'm concerned about what your team picked up. There's no doubt about that.
So what have you done?
Well, that's why I think, just forgive me to go back to what I just said, I think that is why the most important advice of all to members of the public is to protect themselves. Because obviously what Theo...
Well, hang on, your job is to stop these people getting their licences.
Well, no, of course, but what we also must realise is that Theo Usherwood was doing something that, had he been actually somebody who was deliberately trying to do this rather than an investigative journalism way, he was actually going on the street and picking people up from the street, which you are not allowed to do in that situation. The law is quite clear on that. That's not what is allowed to do. And that's why
he was in a position to do that because the checks and balances didn't work.
Well, he wasn't in a position to do it.
He was sitting there in his car with a yellow sticker on it.
I know, but it was still illegal.
Not even his car.
No, but if he had been a genuine individual, it was still illegal for that to happen.
Oh, I see. So you don't stop them, but you just hope the police stop them because they just flood through. Well, let's just disband those centres then.
Well, hang on a second. It's not about that. This is why I'm saying that the regulation review that we have and have gone through, the difference is now that every operator will have to give the vehicle and driver details. That is a different situation than the one we have now. So I recognise it. I'm acknowledging this is an issue. I'm acknowledging absolutely. You asked me what we're doing about it. We are doing something about it. We are changing the way that we assess this.
How hard would it be just to instruct all the staff at these centres that Theo Usherwood's name has to be on the insurance docket, it has to be on the logbook, it has to be on the MOT, and it has to be on everything else? How hard would that be?
Well, it wouldn't be hard, and that's
so
why
let's do it.
We are. That's why we're changing the That's why we're changing the regulations. But the problem is,
as of now.
The problem is, Nick. Let me just answer the question.
You're the boss. How can it be a problem? You bang a desk and you say, "I want it from 3 o'clock this afternoon."
The problem is there is a legislative reality here. There is the law as it currently stands does not allow us to. It requires us to look separately at the driver, the vehicle, and the operator. That's why this is such an important change within this regulation review to require the operator to give us details of the driver and the vehicle. That isn't the position now. They're simply not required to do that.
So when will the change come about, Mr. Brown?
We're obviously now in the implementation phase. This goes to the board tomorrow, next week, our TFL board next week, and then we'll get the implementation plan. And Nick, I'll be very happy to share with you the details of that. But in the meantime, I cannot emphasise enough. I mean, crime is relatively low on the streets of London, but actually the best way people can protect themselves and help us with enforcement activity, by the way, which we do a lot of. We've had an operation called Operation Neon jointly with the Metropolitan Police, assessing illegal vehicles, assessing illegal touting activity. But, people should not get in. Don't be tempted when you come out of a bar or a restaurant or a club late at night. Yep. We've all been tempted. We've all had these guys coming up to us and saying, would you like a car home? How would you get home? All this sort of stuff. Please don't be tempted. It's not the thing to do.
All right, we move to other calls. I think it's related. Danny is in Camden. You're through to Mr. Brown. Go ahead, Danny.
Hello, Nick. Hello, Mr. Brown.
Hello,
I'm glad you just said your priorities protect the travelling public. My question is regarding sexual assault figures. Now, it's been widely reported on social media. It's been leaked, and these are Met figures and City of London police figures. Last year, there were 68 TFL licensed private hire drivers arrested. There was 44 unlicensed drivers arrested. There was a staggering 180 reported rapes and sexual assault reported offences to the police. Now, if that's not staggering enough, I'll give you another example how TFL are. It's been also reported that TFL gave these figures to taxi organisations under the provision they wouldn't be made public.
How do you know this, lastly, before I bring Mr. Brown in? Danny?
It's been widely reported. You had someone on last week on your own show.
I know, quoting some of the figures. But you've not actually had sight of this supposed TFL document, have you, Danny, or you have?
I have, yes.
You've had
some. Cab drivers have.
Okay.
Most cab drivers have.
Danny, I'm not cutting you off. I just want to get Mr. Brown. You'll come back. Commissioner.
Well, the first thing to say is any sexual assault whatsoever.
Do you recognise these figures?
The first thing to say is any sexual assault whatsoever is an appalling thing for the individual involved. So let me just be absolutely clear. This is absolutely awful. It's a horrible thing to happen to anybody, and we should treat it, and we do indeed treat it with the absolute full arm of the law. We get the Met Police involved. We get them roped in whenever we can.
Do you recognise these figures?
These are Met Police figures, so I don't actually get sight of them. These are figures held by the Metropolitan Police, so that is really genuinely a matter for them, because it's a crime. This is not, this is a crime issue. The other thing that is really important to me, though, is that the reporting of such sexual offences, and particularly what might have previously, and it's a pretty awful term actually, Nick, been described as minor sexual offences. I don't think any sexual offence actually is a minor one, really, for the victim in these issues. Minor sexual offences the reporting has increased hugely, which I really welcome, because I would absolutely encourage, whether it's actually in a private hire vehicle, whether it's in a cab, whether it's on the tube, on the buses, wherever, we've been having a real campaign to, Project Guardian with the Met Police, with the British Transport Police, to try and increase the reporting. So I don't recognise the exact numbers that Danny's talking about, as he's just mentioned. These are Met Police statistics. We work very closely with the Met Police. You don't keep your own figures? Well, we keep our figures of those who are actually prosecuted. So I can give you the numbers I've got for prosecutions. They are ones that, or the ones that are ones that we actually get in our database.
How many sexual assaults were there last year in the back of cabs?
135.
135.
Yeah.
And how many arrests do we have as a result of that?
Well, I don't have the exact numbers of the arrests, but then that's the police follow that up. They will.
And
sometimes
135 last year. What did it play the year before?
Well,
what
it was
increase?
139 the year before, 101 the year before that, 126 the year before that. So these are broadly of the same. Now, if you think of actually the huge volume increase,
it's about 2 a week, though, isn't it?
It's a lot. I mean, that's what I'm saying, Nick. And I just to emphasise again, any single one is a horrible personal issue for the individual concerned. I do encourage people to report anything suspicious whatsoever around this, whether they think it's a possibility or a reality. Please get report it.
We have to stop appropriately for a travel break in a moment. But Danny, quick word before you do. Quick response from you, Danny. Back to you.
Well, firstly, it's TFL who've said they don't want these reported because it would scare the public.
You don't agree with that, Mr.
No, that's so totally the opposite. The absolute truth is, I want every one of the.
Untrue.
Well, I really want these reported.
That's untrue.
Yeah, absolutely untrue.
That's untrue.
Yeah, Danny, he is. Yes, I don't know what you don't. The Commissioner is saying it's categorically untrue. Yes.
The TFL have said not to report these figures because it has scared the public. You're saying that's untrue.
I'm saying that every sexual offence should be reported to the Metropolitan Police, and we follow up in detail with the Metropolitan Police. The figures that the Metropolitan Police have may be slightly different from ours because we only get the outcome of what investigation the Met Police has followed. So there is some discrepancy in the figures, I've no doubt. I don't see the core figures the Metropolitan Police have because that's a matter for the police, as it rightly should be.
Last sentence to you, Danny. I must get travelling. Go on.
Right, we're living in an age of Rotherham and BBC cover-ups. If it's the case that TFL have said we don't want to have these figures published because it has scared the public, will someone jump because of it?
Well, there was no one in my team who will ever be anything other than open with any figures we have. This is not something we would ever shy away from, and that's why with our project called Project Guardian, we've been encouraging reporting on all of these sexual offences, and I will continue to absolutely do so.
We pause briefly, appropriately, for a travel update. 16 after 9. Mark is in Southwark, and you're through to Mr. Brown. Go ahead, Mark.
Morning. Hi. I was just curious about sort of seen a lot in the media the last few weeks about steep carbon fare freeze. I was just wondering if Mike can confirm if this is going to cost TFL 1.9 billion.
This is the idea by the Labour candidate to be mayor, of course, the £1.9 billion fare freeze. Commissioner.
Well, the first thing to say is I am absolutely committed to having London affordable and accessible for everybody. So I actually want low fares as well in transport. There's no doubt about that. There's no difference between me and anybody else in that approach. Now, actually, the way that this has been calculated, I absolutely can see how the calculations are different because we've made particular in our 1.9 billion, which we did talk about. First of all, that's over 5 years, not over the mayoral term. Secondly, that is based on an initial assumption, which has been the base level assumption up until now, which is a fares increase of inflation, RPI, plus 1%. So therefore, if you take that forward and you use the inflation assumptions that I've used, which we've taken from the Office of Budget Responsibility, from GLA Economics, from the Bank of England, a combination of those assumptions on inflation, then you get to our number. But it is perfectly legitimate.
The mayoral candidate would contest that number. He says it's more like 450 million.
It's perfectly conceivable that people will use different inflation assumptions. assumptions, and certainly the mayoral term, of course, is only 4 years rather than 5 years. And also, if you start from a baseline of zero fare increases, then you come to a different number. So
that's the difference. You're saying 1.9 billion. He's saying 450 million.
Yeah. So they're perfectly legitimate ways why the calculation.
What would it mean? What would the freeze mean for transport?
Well, look, we're already. The important thing that people should need to know is I'm absolutely determined to preserve our major investment program.
And this would damage it.
Well, no. This I think we've got to keep investing. We got an 11 billion pound settlement from the government.
So what would the effect be on the investment program?
So what we're trying to do, Nick, is to avoid impacting on the investment program. The core modernisation of the tube lines, the road modernisation program, the £4 billion there, other things that we need to do to keep the city moving. So, of course, we're going to tackle some of our day-to-day costs. We're going to have another look and see how we can merge some of our back office functions to make sure that they're more efficient, more economical. We're doing all of that work anyway. Of course, we want to make sure we can see whether we can get other streams of revenue in, so oversight developments of our stations, better use of our railway land, all that kind of stuff. So, we're going to have to work with numbers as we see them, as they emerge over the next few weeks and months, and we'll do so. I'll be happy to work with
How would you react if London woke up with Sadiq Khan as its mayor, Mr. Brown?
I'd be happy to work with anyone London elects as their mayor.
Do you think he was talking about you when he described TFL as flabby?
Well, I hope not. I think there are elements of...
Certainly not your personal physique, I can attest to that.
Well, thank you. I have to say, look, I think there are parts of any organisation that always need to be trimmed. There are parts of TFL...
Are bureaucrats running the show, as you said?
Well, I don't think... you can call me a bureaucrat if you like, but I actually am committed to transport in this city, and I think the most important thing is that we focus all our activity, all our delivery on delivering those big projects and delivering a better transport system.
Let's listen to a little of what Mr. Khan said.
What TFL needs, frankly speaking, is a mayor who's going to take charge of TFL and be the chair of TFL and make sure it works for Londoners.
So you're going to tell Mike Brown what to do?
Well, look, what's really important is,
You're going to tell Mike Brown what to do, aren't you?
What's really important is this, Mike Brown and TFL works for the mayor and for Londoners, not the other way around.
Do you think he's been running rings around Boris Johnson?
Well, I think the downside of having a part-time mayor with no experience and no interest is, the bureaucrats get to run the show. I intend to be a full-time mayor.
Taking charge of TFL, how do you respond to that?
Well, as I said, I look forward to working with whoever's elected in May to be the Mayor of London. They'll be my boss, and I'm excited about the prospect for whoever wins.
We move on. Shuvik is in Eltham. Shuvik, you're on the radio.
Hi, Nick. Hi, Commissioner.
Hello.
Yes, I think it's very important to support British manufacturing more than at present. So, of the buses and trains that TfL currently order, what percentage are made in the UK?
Oh, it's interesting.
Well, nearly all at the moment, actually. So, in fact,
Northern Ireland is one of the big sites, isn't it?
Northern Ireland. I was over in Northern Ireland just the week before last, looking at buses that are being made in Ballymena and Antrim over there. We've got trains being assembled in Derby at the moment. I'm going up to Derby, Nick and Shuvak, tomorrow just to see the new Crossrail trains, which are starting to roll off the production line there, or the Elizabeth line trains, I should say. We're already finishing the order for the Circle and the District line trains up there as well. 191 of those, all assembled in the UK, protecting UK jobs and manufacturing. And of course, it's not just the main, the headline suppliers, people like Bombardier or Wright Brothers in Northern Ireland. It's actually all the other smaller companies that they support as well. So I think it's really, really important that people understand that investing in transport in London really does create jobs, growth, apprentices, opportunities for people across the whole UK. I think that's really important. That's something I'm absolutely committed to seeing what we can do to continue.
Shuvik, thank you. Some emails coming in, texts and tweets of calls. Ashley in Beaconsfield. Why do TfL find it acceptable to advise us not to use certain stations during rush hour when we are commuting, like Victoria? Yes, the idea is that you don't want people going to Victoria in the rush hour. You don't think they go there for fun, do you, Mr. Brown?
No, but the numbers have gone up at Victoria by 25 million over the last 10 years.
25 million per
year over the last 10 years. I mean, that's significant. That's why, Nick, of course, we're about to, later on this year in November, we'll unveil a brand new ticket hall to the northern side of the Victoria Underground station. It's why it's so important that we proceed with Crossrail 2, for example, which I'm hoping we'll get some good news quite soon on from the government.
But it's an admission of a defeat or failure, isn't it, to Victoria, asking people not to turn up between 8 and 9. Well, they're doing it because they have to.
Of course they are, and I understand that. And actually, we're just trying to give some people advice as to when the busiest times are.
They can't. It's their jobs, Mr. Brown.
So the busiest day on the Underground in 2000 had 2.5 million journeys, Nick. Now we carry 4.8 million people almost on a daily basis. I mean, that is a remarkable growth in terms of the number of people using the Underground. And actually, we haven't had really any new lines since those numbers have gone up. So that's why Crossrail will add 10% to London's transport capacity in one fell swoop.
That's all great. It's people who want to get to work at Victoria tomorrow and Monday after.
Of course.
And they can't go.
Well, no, and London's population is higher than it's ever been before. 8.6 million people now.
Well, how are we going to cope with more people coming?
Well, we've got to keep building. We've got to keep investing in transport in London. We've just said in advance
make that possible because it'll freeze the fares.
Well, the investment programme, I'm absolutely determined we preserve that we move forward. We've got £11 billion worth of investment spend from the government last year. So we've got to keep the focus on modernising the rest of the tube lines. We've got to have that signalling put in on the Circle of the District line. We've got to have those new trains on Crossrail, and we've got to go ahead with Crossrail too.
We spoke with John Leach, who I'm sure you'll know, but for my listeners' benefit, as regional organiser for the RMT in London, he had this to say.
He should know better, really. He's a very, very experienced tube manager who's been around a long time. He knows it's creaking at the seams. He knows they can't carry another, get ready for this, just under £4 billion worth of cuts going forward over the next 5 years. The people of London, who he ultimately serves, deserve a lot better. They need to stand up to the mayor and the government behind that and say we can't do it with the resources we've got.
Initially complimentary, Mr. Brown, but saying you need to stand up.
Well, I think we are standing up. We talk very often to people in government, ministers.
Well, you're not standing up. You're telling passengers not to turn up at Victoria. How's that standing up?
No. Look, let's not be misled by the headlines of this. The newspaper headlines are newspaper headlines. The reality of this story is, all we're saying is, look, if a few people could occasionally adjust their journey times just by half an hour here and there, a couple of days a week, it can make a material difference to how easy it is for them to get around. I know how I use the tube every morning to get into work, Nick. I know how busy it is. It really is busy out there. And actually the point is, all we're saying is, look, if you can come a little bit early, some people can't because of childcare or other issues at home, I understand that. If you can come a little bit late because you have a discussion with your boss, then that's all great. That will just help ease the system at the seams. Right. But the amount of additional service we've been running in the last 5 or 6 years as we've modernised, as we've made the place 50% more reliable, by the way, in the last 8 years, I mean, that is quite significant. But we've got to keep doing more. Of course we have.
Rachel in Bexley says, I drive into London every weekday for work. Whose idea was it to close the north side of Westminster Bridge down to one lane and then close the road where you cut down by the side of the barracks towards Buckingham Palace? Do you recognise the road? I know the bridge. I don't know the road she's talking about.
I do know exactly where the road is. So
what road is that? Sorry,
it's the bit as you.
So it takes you down. Oh, the barracks on the left, the palace is on the left, and Horse Guards is on your right as well. I know where you are.
That's correct.
Okay. Oh, you've closed that road, have you?
Well, look. So what we're doing is.
What have you done that?
Well, we're obviously in the middle of delivering quite a lot of cycle superhighway work. We're delivering these great new cycle superhighways, which will, by the way, be very used. 1 in 5 people. If you compare to
why don't you make it mandatory to use them?
Well, I actually think people should use these.
No, I should. But why don't you make it the law? They get nicked if they don't.
Well, because powerful as I may be, Nick, I don't make the laws of the land.
But it would be a good idea to have that, wouldn't it?
I quite like the idea of people, being encouraged.
No, mandated is the word we're using, Mr. Brown.
Well, I'm using the words encouraged to
well, how do you feel about the word mandated?
Well, I quite like the idea that people will use the cycle superhighways. I think they're going to be fantastic. I think once they're fully open, people will really want to use these things. Now, I do recognise, let me just not underplay the challenges on parts of London's road network at the moment as we're going about this major building programme. It is difficult. It is tough out there. I know that. We're gradually going to see this easing off as we open these cycle superhighways, as we finish works, for example, at the Elephant and Castle.
Why are so many buses travelling so slowly?
Elephant and Castle and Northern
6 miles an hour is the average speed for many buses. And we've got it's almost quicker to go on a donkey, as a journalist from The Sun showed.
We've got to look at that too.
That's embarrassing.
Donkeys aren't great on traffic, but buses. Look, we've got to look at buses as well. We've got to assess how we can, prioritise for buses, prioritise for cyclists, pedestrians, everybody else. It is a product of a busy, successful city. In many ways, Nick, it's a great problem to have, but it doesn't help in the moment if you're stuck in a traffic jam. For which I can just tell you, we're aware of it. We've got people trying to track this all the time, and we're trying to, as we unveil these cycle superhighways and we improve junctions such as Elephant and Castle and elsewhere.
You say that's an improvement, Mr. Brown?
Well, it's not unveiled.
It's not what the locals are saying.
It's not finished yet, Nick. It's not finished.
Okay, we must get one final question. Yep. Essen in Hammersmith, you're on the radio. Go ahead, Essen.
Hi, Mr. Brown, would you get in the back of a cab whose driver's been working for about 20 or 24 hours?
Well, I would rather not, I guess, is the answer to that.
Why do you ask that, Essen?
The reason is, at the moment, because Uber prices have gone so cheap, the cab drivers can't seem to make ends meet. So they're having to work for 20, 24 hours, sometimes even longer. And there's no way of ensuring that these guys this is becoming a public safety issue. If you go through social media, it's more and more abundant that drivers are working stupid hours. And look, you've got truck drivers, train drivers, and pilots on time limits.
Yes.
Why not cab drivers? I mean, there's plenty of examples on the media where people are getting into. I mean, I know a guy who said to a cab driver to stop, and he will drive his car to the airport because he was so scared that he was going to die along the way.
How could this be? How do you think this could be regulated? Briefly, before we get Mr. Brown's view, Essen.
Well, one company and one driver. That's the only way that these cab drivers, because at the moment they're switching on and off apps between cab companies, and this is
so better. I see better registration of the drivers. So if you work for Ferrari cabs, you work for Ferrari cabs or whatever, or you work for Uber, and that's it.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, I do have a lot of sympathy for that point. I think you've got to make sure that you get into a cab that it's safe, that you're going to have a driver that you can rely on. But these are very difficult things to enforce. There's been years, decades of enforcement for things like tachographs and other things in HGV vehicles. I've seen some of that work in practice. But there are very clear regulations for train drivers and airline pilots, as the caller so eloquently said.
You just need to hook up the car. You just see a number plate and it just takes you straight through to Ferrari cabs or LBC cabs or Uber. Look, how hard is that?
Well, I think it's a good point. I think this is something we should have a look at. I think it is a concern, obviously, and we've got to look at this. I mean, look, this whole issue, Nick, as has been identified again this morning with the number of calls on this subject, is a very, very difficult minefield of issues to get through. Because on the one hand, you want to encourage, the free market. You want to encourage entrepreneurs to be able to set up their cab business and earn a decent living.
I can't understand why you don't have a benefit. For instance, we've been working on the tragedy of the child who was killed in Hyde Park. Terrible story.
Yeah, terrible.
And one of our journalists contacted TFL, and TFL told them yesterday they would not be able to tell us which company operated the minicab because they did not have that information. Yeah. Why don't you have that information?
Well, it's to do with what TFL actually does, and there's a difference between regulating the thing overall and being absolutely intrusively involved in every minute detail of a private operator.
Details.
No, I know, but it's a.
I mean, if LBC had a fleet of company cars, they would know which journalists had the car. But you've got these guys driving. You don't even know who the car owns.
But they're not our cars. They're not our cars, Nick.
No, but you license them.
That's a fundamental difference. It's a bit like saying to the DVLA that they will know every single issue of every single car. They don't. I mean, these.
No, but if I am applying for hire or whatever it's called in London and I'm authorised by TFL, is it that much to expect that alongside Nick Ferrari, it's labelled that I work for Leicester Square Cabs?
Well, then that's exactly why, as I said right at the front of this slot half an hour ago, that actually the reality is that now the change in regulation will allow us to ensure that we actually have a link between the operator, the vehicle and the driver. That's a step forward. It won't solve all the problems, but I do believe it's quite an important step forward, and clearly, we want to continue to make progress in this area. This is obviously an area of concern for Londoners, and we've got to try and see what we can do to make it better.
But why follow these people, lastly?
I mean, I follow thousands and thousands of people on Twitter. If it's the case that I'm following somebody who's I shouldn't be following, I'll unfollow them. And by the way, there are thousands and thousands of people who follow me, some of whom also have views that you and I would both